All right. Hello, everybody. Tara Baklund here with the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, here for another great talk. I know this is going to be, I've always enjoyed my talks with you, Amanda, and we are discussing today the healing potential of rose for trauma with herbalist and author Amanda Nicole. And if you missed it last time, she is the author of a really wonderful book, Flowers for a Girl, and is plant medicine and sexual trauma. And it sounds initially like a really heavy topic, which you can find at alchemillas.com. That's ALCHEMILLAS.com. For most people, that is a pretty heavy topic, but I'd say the way it was written, Amanda, is so beautifully done that even those with, let's just say, different types of trauma or even milder trauma, we all go through challenges in life. I think is very relatable. And so we're going through the journey of the herbs as they led you along and helped you to heal. And so I'm just happy to be on this, revisiting this journey, because I think it can be very, very helpful and healing to others as well. So thanks for coming back.
No, thank you, Tara. I think it's actually very helpful for me to revisit it as well. And actually, it's been the nudge to create a much needed revised edition of the book. So I've started to work on that too. So it's offering me its own medicine. So thank you.
That's wonderful. Now you've been finishing up a second book as well. How's that going?
It's going great. I finished it. It was going to be called The Story of Us, but the title has been shifted to I Am the Tree, which is quite different, but not. But that book is written. I did it and submitted a proposal to the publishers, but I'm also exploring some other avenues because I'm really feeling oppressed in my heart. So I've decided to start Liriodendrus Press, whether the publishers say yes to that book or not, because I'm sitting on like 4 books. And I just thought, you know what? We need a publishing house for the plants, for the voices of the plants. So I have a lot going on.
Yes. We're very creative in allowing things to come through you, which seems to be a greater part of your journey as we got into last time, and just allowing that process to happen, even though it sounded very, I think it would have been very scary to most people. And maybe it was to you as well. And I'll encourage people to go back to our previous talks, because, I mean, you had dramatic shifts happen in your life, and to allow it to happen, I imagine it was a bit like an earthquake, an unearth, something coming up from below.
Yes.
Or inside. Maybe below, I don't think is the right word, but inside?
Below, inside. Which we touched on some last time with Violet, going deep down and drawing up. But it was very frightening and very scary. And it was an upheaval, an earthquake, like you say. And honestly, I've thought many times, I don't know how people move through the process without the plants, because they were so necessary for me to feel held, to feel as safe as you can in a process like that, to receive comfort. And it's interesting because we're going to touch on Rose today. That's who we're going to speak about. And when I began to remember what happened, it started out as these moments where I would be vacuuming the floor and suddenly I'd have it like a still life photo shot in front of my face. Or I'd be washing the dishes and suddenly this still life photo shot. And I would think, whoa, where did that come from? It just seems so not how I would be thinking about a person or a place. And interestingly enough, at the time, my then husband was, I'll tell you some of what my life was like. He was preaching a sermon series on incest. There aren't very many sermon series on incest. It kind of makes me teary eyed thinking about it. You kind of hope we lived in a world where that wasn't even necessary,
Mhm.
to have that. But really, it was pretty specific and pointed. There were some other things happening in the world at that time that I'm remembering. It was sort of like almost like a storm swirling with his sermons, with things that were happening in the media and stories that were coming out. And so I started having these just still life moments. And then one evening, I can't remember how much I say about this in Flowers for a Girl, but one evening, he and I had come home from a church meeting, which was very stressful because there was discipline, because it was a church that exercised discipline, excommunication happening. And we were laying in bed. This is going to sound really bizarre what I'm getting ready to say too after I say that. Life was strange. But we were getting ready to be together intimately. And suddenly, like my whole world just went black. It was like a blackout. And it was up to that point, it was one of the most frightening moments of my life that I can remember. And I had my hands over my face like this. And I just started saying over and over again, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. And I could feel all sorts of sensations, and it was very scary. It was like a living nightmare, and I was in the dark. And at the time, I couldn't articulate anything that I was thinking or seeing or feeling, but I was feeling all of it. And I moved past saying something's wrong to urgently saying to him, turn on the lights, while my hands were like this. There was so much fear. I was so afraid. I was so scared. And when he flipped the lights on, even though my hands were still over my eyes, uh, it sort of took me out of that space. It was enough of like a disruption to take me out of that space. And in that moment, I knew. Like I knew. So when you say it was scary, it was, and it was like an earthquake or an upheaval, it was. And it was the beginning of changes in my life that are still occurring. Nothing's the same. Nothing that was really there before remains. Hopefully that won't be true for everybody, but it was true for me. But the part that Rose played in that is very deep. And one of the things I'll touch on just to start our conversation is that evening, while it was pitch black and I was saying something's wrong, behind my eyes that I was covering, what I was seeing was like a curtain, like a theater, a stage curtain. And it was like there were these hands that kept trying to pull back the curtain because they wanted me to look and see what was behind the curtain. And I just kept telling them, no, 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 I don't want to see it. And part of the medicine that I came to experience from Rose is the ability to see, the ability to look and see. So, up to that point, I had only worked with Rose very little, and I had been using it for almost 2 years as a hydrosol, like to spritz on my face for almost 2 years. I was just drawn to it, lots of reasons for that, connected to my miscarriages and whatnot. Um, and I'm going to pause. I won't dive into it now. I'll just see where this takes us. But it enabled me to see. It's like it held my heart. And even up to that 2 years brought me to the place where I could even do what I did that evening and then continued with me. So it sort of held my heart, because sometimes we think I can't see that about a person or a situation, because my heart will just shatter, like it'll just break me. And so Rose was like holding my heart while it was opening my eyes.
That's really amazing, because I've been reflecting the last couple of years about heartbreak, but coinciding with like the hardened heart. And when you're like kind of, I think when it's like shattered and you don't even know how to assemble the pieces. And I think we naturally shut ourselves off to anything that resembles what could shatter even that part of us even more. And so Yeah, like you're saying that just it sounds like nurturing, embracing, kind of holding the space for
Mhm.
you. Did you have people at that time who you could go to and that could help in that way, or were you really reliant on the herbs knowingly or unknowingly?
Well, at the time, my then husband was present, and he did his best. But interestingly enough, that was when I had begun to take classes with Matt. That's when he was coming to Green Comfort and once a month and staying over for the weekend and offering classes. And I remember maybe just a week or two after that first moment, and I was thinking, what is happening and what am I going to do? And I had called my then teacher, Teresa, because I had remembered something she said in class, and so I thought she might be helpful to me. And she recommended energy work, like Reiki and other types of body and energy work. Because what she said, which is very true, is that the body has no desire to re traumatize itself, it wants to heal. And so when you use those types of modalities, the body, the mind, the heart, the consciousness, whatever all the words are, finds a way to communicate with you without re traumatizing you. You sort of find your own language, your own symbols and images. So I was open to that, but at the time, I was a pastor's wife in a very conservative Christian church, and energy work was not necessarily allowed. Very little body work. I think I already alluded to in our past conversations, kind of keeping things on the down low as it was. Um, and I didn't even really know what all those words meant.
Mm-hmm.
So I go to this weekend class with Matt, which was um, the first one after that first moment. And we're in class that day, and he's talking about the fascia,
Mm-hmm.
right? All over the body, the fascia, and how it holds memory. And he was specifically talking about how, hopefully, I'm going to say this right, I'm going to remember this correctly, how the fascia is like concentrated around the heart. I think I remember him saying in that class, it's the place in the body where the most of it is present, like it's concentrated there around the heart. And he looked at this, one of my fellow classmates. Her name is Katie. She might be a lovely person to talk to too. Matt knows who she is. He loves her.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked up and said to Katie, who was presenting herself as like a massage therapist and also craniosacral therapist. He said to her, Katie, when you're working with people, is there a particular plant that you use to help people release memories that are in the fascia around the heart? And she said, Rose. I use rose. And the minute she said it, I knew she was my person because I had already been having some moments with Rose beyond just the hydrosol. And obviously, just the idea of memory, and how to release it. And I remember Teresa, my teacher, and I, we were sitting across from each other in the room. She was on one chair and I was on the other. And as soon as Katie said that, we just locked eyes, Teresa and I, like
Mm-hmm.
a person. So I went to her at lunch and, told her what had happened. And she was the person that I worked with primarily. When you read the book, Flowers for a Girl, every single chapter, whether she's mentioned or not, Katie is present because I would go to the sessions with her, and then the plants would come the next month until I saw her again. And she really held that space for me. So I would say Matthew Wood, because he was there for months at the beginning of that. It was really extraordinary. Um, even even though he wasn't I'm going to touch on this. This is very important. We're talking about Rose, but this is very important. So Matthew Wood, Teresa, my teacher, and Katie, the the body worker, the energy worker. Matthew Wood held an incredible amount of space during that time that I have told him, but I'm not sure he fully understands because how can you, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to get teary eyed. So up to that point in my life, I obviously had not experienced pleasant male energy, like masculine energy that is balanced. that is also, to be honest, rose like. That's also soft and loving and kind and gentle, those sorts of things. And for all those months he was coming to Teresa's, he showed up right when it began, and he left just as I was kind of finding my balance again.
Mm.
And I remember in the last class that we had with him there at Green Comfort, Teresa gathered us all in a circle, and she wanted to sing as a way of closing out the circle. And so, as is sadly often common with herbal classes, there were 25 women, and Matt was the only man in the group. There were no men in that class, and we all gathered in the circle, and Matt got up and he got into the circle when Teresa called it, and he was directly across from me in the circle. And I remember I didn't even sing the song because I was standing there sort of mesmerized watching him, because he joined the circle of women fully. He participated fully in a place where, up to that point in my life, men would have thought, this is silly, this is ridiculous, this is dumb, this isn't accomplishing anything, I'm too manly for this, I'm too tough for this. But he fully engaged in it and was also fully masculine, you know? And I just remember standing there watching, just sort of being in awe of it, because I'd never seen anything like that before from a man. So I think that was actually incredibly important for me during that time, as I was beginning to remember, to have him as a teacher, and a man who was my teacher, that was holding space for myself and the members of my class in a very safe, loving, kind, gentle, but also masculine way. So that's a little bit of a side note, but I feel like it's incredibly important. And thank you for asking who was there, because I do want to recognize um, Teresa and Katie and Matt as having been there. One other thing, I also want to mention Kyung Lee. She was an acupuncturist who had been with me for a little while. She's part of my secret we talked about before. And when I went and told her this is what's happening, she said to me, "You make so much sense now." And she said to me, "You're strong enough now. Like, we've been doing this work with you, and you were strong enough to have another baby and have the baby easily and well. Like, you're strong enough physically now for this, as you said, to come up, to rise up. Your body's ready now." Yeah.
That must have been, I mean, how did you feel when she said that? I don't want to put words in
Scared.
your
I was thankful, but
Yeah.
I was also thinking, are you sure that I'm strong enough for this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I think there's so much to a name. And when I think of Rose and the few people that I know who are named Rose as are women, and it's soft yet strong, like very much a feminine strength. And I think there's so much to, like, there's got to be something in the numerology. There's just something about it. And, oftentimes I think we associate, or I'll just speak for myself. When I think of rose and the scent of rose alone, not even just like a bouquet of roses, I think of an older woman, maybe a grandmother. And, I think in generations past also, it was much more common to use the rose hydrosol just as an everyday thing. And, when we think of our matriarchs, there is or the concept of a matriarch, there is that gentleness and femininity, but also strength. And what do you think of that?
I have so much coming up. We'll see what actually comes out of my mouth. First of all, I want to mention a song. I might share a link with you, and then maybe you could put it in the show notes. But it's by this woman, Ayla Schaefer, and it's The Rose. I'm sure some of the people who are going to view this video have heard it. It's a beautiful song about rose medicine. And one of the lines in it, you are stronger than you know. You know, she says it more than once. Like, it's just so lovely. It's a beautiful song. And this is part of it, with roses, like the strength of them, like you said, the thorns, they're pretty powerful. I had to actually take down this vining rose out here. I've got kids, the thorns on it, they're just too much and they're right at the deck. So the strength of those thorns, even the strength of the stalk, it was becoming, woody, but even the petals themselves, there's just a resilience there, a strength, even in the way that they feel. I mean, there's different kinds, that might be softer and more tender, but there's a real strength there. And it's interesting because I had a client, and when she came to me, she had one name. And when she left, after we had spent, oh my goodness, I think we spent 6 months together, she changed her name. She legally changed her name, and she changed it to Rose. And she said that she had always, since she was small, thought that she was Rose. And she had asked her parents to call her Rose, and they hadn't. And in our sessions together, she moved to a place where she said, you know what, I am Rose. And she legally changed her name to it. And here's what's really fascinating about this to me with what you've said. Some people might think, oh, I bet during those 6 weeks, she became like fluffy, fluffy, right? No, she didn't. When she came, she was actually more that way. She had longer hair and she wore like floral prints and was sort of like soft and kind of, like this, right? But by the end of this 6 months together, she was very firm about who she was and about what she was going to do. And her hair was different and her clothes were different. And
Yeah.
yet I'm Rose, right? And I think it was part of what you're saying, like the strength that comes. So when we go back to what we said before about you can see this, you can see the truth of the matter and not shatter, not fall apart. And even these words by Ayla Schaefer, you're stronger than you know. Like there's a strength of heart, right? That really comes into play with Rose. And I love your connection to the matriarch because I don't just use Rose as a hydrosol anymore. I still use it every day, but I also use an infused rose oils, so not like an essential oil, although people could use that. It's really kind of pricey, but it takes so many roses. Anyway, but I'll use like almond oil or jojoba or other carrier oils, and I just like to rub that all over me now. And my youngest son, he said to me a while back, I love the way you smell. You smell so good.
How sweet.
I know, and I've been using it for years. And I would just love it if the scent of rose, you know, is the scent that they take with them because in some ways, even myself, I'm much stronger now than I was. I'm much I'm much woodier, than I was. But I'm also much more feminine and much softer and much more opening and more nurturing. It's just a really lovely blend of medicine.
And what's so neat is there are many types of roses. I think of not only the colors, the different colors, and we intuitively, but also in culturally, know the different meanings. Red symbolizes love. Pink and yellow more of a friendship. White, maybe more peace or neutrality, but still kind of that ad, a love of sorts. But then you have the different types, like you said, even the one that was growing very strongly in your yard. Either it can be a bush or it can be viney or a wild rose. And boy, are those resilient. We used to live in Wisconsin and they were much more prevalent in that area. I still see them in the ditches here in Minnesota, but not as much as in that part of Wisconsin. And it was just like, they look so delicate. They're even smaller. They're not a big bush, or at least probably because they're cut down, but they're so resilient because here in the north, they get snow tossed on them, and salt and sand, and there's tractors that go over them, and still they come up.
Yeah, I love that about them, especially that they still come up. One of the things I've thought about rose, which I'm sure other people have as well, is it blooms whether anybody's looking or not.
Mm.
It comes up and it blooms whether or not anyone's watching or not, whether or not anyone is appreciating it or not. Like, it sort of astounds me, honestly, sometimes to watch people. I'm sure I've been this way also in the past. How did you just pass by that and not like pause and look and notice and enjoy? So I just love that about, I'm here for, I'm really here for myself. Like, you're welcome to enjoy me. I'd love it if you stopped. I'm trying to get your attention in a certain way, but I'm also here for myself. And that's a really lovely part of rose that, you mentioned that we connect it to love. And a lot of times people will think of that as romantic love primarily, especially like with red roses. But we don't, I feel, give rose enough attention for the medicine of self-love that it offers. So I remember when I was with Teresa, and I had already, like I said, had some experiences with rose before that class with Matt. And one of them was, remember I mentioned before in a past conversation we had where she would drop the tincture on our wrist and then we'd see what we noticed, how we responded. Mm-hmm. So I was sitting in the chair. I didn't know what she was going to offer me. Fellow students are paying attention to my pulses, and my eyes are closed, and suddenly I felt like the hands of my heart reaching out to grab whatever it was she had. Also at this moment, I was expecting a baby. This was during my miscarriages. But I had been feeling a little off about things. Like, there was that knowing, that this might not go well either. So my heart reached out and she dropped it, and it was Rose. And when I moved out of the chair, she was talking to some of the other students, and I looked up in the yurt, and this was astounding. I've not had this happen since, but I'd like for it to. Suddenly, I could see everything in the yurt crystal clear. Like, it was almost like a snow globe, like where you can see the line of something so well, you see the curve of it. It was astounding, like crystal, the way we say that, crystal clear. And I was sitting on the couch, and she's talking to a couple of other students, and I just exclaimed, I couldn't help it. I just said, wow, I can see so clearly. Like, it was just sort of bizarre. And Teresa said, all right, honey. I don't know what she was doing. But on my way home, I stopped and I bought myself a dozen red roses because I could still feel it in my heart so much. And when I got home, got my kids to bed, my partner went to bed, I started to bleed. I started to miscarry. And I just had known it. And I kind of feel like, not that Rose was physically a part of this, but it was present that day, for what was coming. And I drew a bath, and I actually ended up taking those rose petals and sprinkling it into the bath. But I've used it since then for self-love. I mean, that's what putting oil all over my body is. I'm loving myself. And sometimes when I'm putting the oil on, I say it. I love you, Amanda. I love you so much. I'll say it, even just spritzing it on my face. But I think that when we experience trauma, and it doesn't have to be sexual trauma, there's all sorts of ways we experience nicks, pricked, pricked by thorns, wounds. That's one of the first things to go, I feel, is self-love, because we think there's no possible way I could be lovable or this person wouldn't have done this to me. There's no possible way I could be lovable or they wouldn't have treated me this way. If I was lovable and they loved me, this wouldn't be how I'm being treated. I must not be lovable. Where we start to look at ourselves and think, I'm not a rose. I'm not beautiful. I'm not pretty. I'm not attractive. And I don't just mean that on a physical level. I mean, like, our soul essence level. It's one of the first things to go. And so many people that I've worked with in sessions over the years, it's one of the first things that needs to come back, before we can start moving forward, is the ability to love ourselves again. Right. And so, like the rose, I'm just blooming for me. I mean, you can like it, you can not like it. But I think I'm pretty lovely. But that's, most of us are not there. And especially I feel at the beginning of, you know, these healing journeys that we set out on.
It makes me think of, it's so common in therapy sessions when you go through any kind of difficult time, and particularly when it stems from childhood, the counselor will often guide you to envision yourself as the child and embracing that child, and saying to that child, which is you, that you love them, that you love yourself, and even calling yourself by name. And I imagine that this is to start that process, right? If you can start with loving the inner child, then that can grow with you over time.
Yes. And I, as so many others have, I'm sure, I had that experience very directly. Almost immediately, once I started working with Katie, and she was able to help me sort of get my bearings, and have a container for it, there was, there, there became little Amanda. That was what we called her, and that's just what she was. She was little Amanda. And I remember once, at one of the first sessions, finding her. Yeah, this was like the very first session, right at this time when we're talking about Rose. She was like in a dirt cellar type place, actually in my right hip. So we went into my right hip, and in my right hip there was a dirt cellar, and little Amanda was in the dirt cellar, and her knees were pulled up, and she had like her head down, holding her knees, and there was like cobwebs in her hair and spiders in her hair, and I was shaking her. I was not being very kind. And I was saying to her, wake up, Amanda. You have to wake up. If you don't wake up, we're not going to make it. Amanda, Amanda. And I just kept shaking her. I was very upset with her, and I was mad at her for just, dying, wasting away to nothing in this dirt cellar, like get up. And I was shaking her, and it wasn't, as you might imagine, it wasn't working. And I was trying to sort of communicate to her the urgency of the situation for her to revive and to sort of come to, as they say. And I had this moment while it was happening where I realized she does not need more of this. What are you doing? Mm. And I stopped, and I put my arms around her, and I said to her, I'm sorry. Mm. I'm going to start crying. And I said, I love you. I love you. I'm so sorry. I love you. And it just took me saying that a few times. And she she peeked up. And you know what happened that day? I led her out of my right hip into my heart. Mm. And there was a little, I want to say throne, but that's a little dramatic, but it kind of was. There was this comedian. I'm not going to remember her name. You might remember. But she would sit in this huge chair, and she would be a little girl, and she'd, rock back from like the 70s, and she'd sit in the chair and be this little girl. And that's what little Amanda looked like. She was so happy, like, ooh, look where I am. This is quite a change. And I started to specifically tend her. And it's interesting because over the course of the journey, there was actually one energy session. This was an acupuncture session in particular. I laid on the table and I watched her. I watched Amanda grow. I watched her get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I watched her like start to grow up and fill out. And it's been a long time since I've talked about her, because if you understand what I mean, she doesn't really exist anymore, in that we're integrated. We're whole. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did a lot of those visions come up during energy or healing sessions or acupuncture, like you mentioned?
With little Amanda?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot. One of them, she was in Teresa's yurt, and I sat with her, and I realized in that moment, I just need to love her. We don't need to talk. We don't need to have a conversation. I just need to love her. It's interesting because in the book that I just finished writing, that will be published soon in the future, I Am the Tree, there's a section in that book. This draws a lot of rose medicine together. Not all of our mothers are roses. Not all matriarchs are rose like. So when I was little, I remember sitting on the edge of my mom's bed, and she said to me, and I was like in elementary school, she wasn't happy with me about something. I'd done something wrong. I put that in quotation marks. I'm so over like people doing something wrong. And she looked at me with these eyes full of disappointment, and she said, there just has to be a pretty girl in there somewhere. Yeah. And
Wow.
I could tell like she wasn't really convinced that that was the case, you know? And I just sat there. It just, it went right to my heart. And I felt my heart just drop because I could tell from the way she said it, she didn't think so. And she was also saying it as, like a passive aggressive way of saying there's not one, you know? And then I was so sad because I was kind of thinking, I'm not a pretty girl. There's not one in there somewhere. I've lost her. And I talk about in the book how when I was excused from the, like, I want to say conversation, but it was more of a lecture. I went to the bathroom in that house, and I was little, but I looked in the mirror and kind of like leaned in to see like if I could see her in there. And on that particular day, I didn't. And this is a really beautiful thing about Rose because I'm going to get teary eyed again. Because what I'm getting ready to say was something I was never allowed to say, and I wouldn't have ever said. But I'm allowed to say it now, and I mean it now. That even though, like, my skin doesn't look the way it used to, and my hair, especially since COVID, and all sorts of things just aren't the way they used to, I really love myself. I love the way that I look. I'm so glad, like, that I get to be Amanda and that I get to have my body. And, like, by no means is it, what people would think of as our constructed, social ideal. But I love myself. And I do tell myself that. Sometimes I'll just, like, I literally will just kind of like hug myself and be like, I love you, but that wasn't allowed. Like that was seen as, vain. And Rose is so much about that, about beauty.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much about beauty. I mean, it's traditionally been used, cosmetics and aphrodisiacs and, all these different ways. And so it's really lovely because part of what it helps us to see is not just the truth of the matter that might be hard or difficult, that your heart might shatter, right? But it allows us to see the truth of ourselves. Look at you. You're beautiful. Because that is actually the truth. Underneath it all, that is the truth of the matter. So I think it's just a lovely medicine for, this is the phrase that came out, talking to us the way we should have been spoken to, looking at us, speaking to us, treating us the way that we should have been, in a way that's loving.
Mm-hmm. So many things came to mind, and I think there's a whole like psychoanalytic conversation of, self-love and vanity or narcissism. But I think it can be summed up like when you experience it, you experience that it's whole. And where vanity and narcissism are heavily leaned, towards, I don't know what that would be. This would be an impromptu discussion. Um, but I'm going to spit out a few things, and then you can just choose whatever you want to what you want to respond to. What I find also interesting is medicinally, rose is a toner. It's tonifying, right? And that's why even sprayed on your face, it helps to tonify the skin. And so those who may not be familiar, like I knew the word tone, I knew a toner like skincare, but I didn't really know what it was. So it kind of helps bring things back together, like tone your muscles. You kind of tighten it up a little bit, just enough. And so even as you mentioned, like cradling the heart or holding the heart. And the last thing, because I want to see where you go with this, I'm just tossing you. I wonder if also at this time where you met little Amanda and were nurturing her, were your kids around? Did you have kids around the same age at that time? And did it change your relationship with them?
Wow, I got chills, still getting chills with that last question. Let me just feel them for a minute. So that's probably a question we're going to touch on. I will say before we touch on that one, the toning part, yes, the strengthening of the tissues, the toning, the even astringent quality in some way, which is why it was so lovely for me with that miscarriage as well, because I did take the bath, but I also began to take it in lady's mantle because you do need to bleed. Obviously, your body's releasing, but at that time, I really tended to bleed too much, and so very beautiful for that. And also, it is toning to the womb, and uh, it's really lovely to use for toning it, not only for cycles, but even for birth. Because a toned uterus, just like any other muscle, is going to do well when it comes time for that exercise of birth. And more than once, I can feel it right now as I'm saying it. One time in particular, just to say, there was this in an acupuncture appointment. There was something. It was running all over my body. This little dark entity. It needed a place to go because I had it on the run. These memories, this way of thinking about myself. And it kept wanting to be in my womb. That's where it kept trying to go. And that particular day, suddenly I saw my womb and it was full of rose quartz, the stone, rose quartz. And it was just like emanating, like, there's no room for you here. Mm. Love has taken over this space. That's what's here now. Mm. So, my children, this is very important. Yes. When I started to remember, my oldest daughter was getting to be right around 7 or 8 years old, which was the time that my experience of things when I was a child was coming to an end. But it was also this time in her life where I would glance over and look at her when she was sitting beside me in church, and I'd get a little distracted because I would look at her and think, she's not like a little girl anymore. Like, even though she was 7, 8, you start to see the shift. They're starting to shift, out of girlhood, moving towards that like teen. They're moving into this. I mean, now we'll say like preteen or tween, all these words. But you can see that, she's not going to be a little girl for much longer. And I actually think that was part of what I mentioned earlier, the perfect storm, where I start to remember. Because now I have this daughter, right? And I remember when she was going to be born, there was a lot going on at her birth too. Like, the church was just wearing me out. But for like a week or so before she was born, every single night I would have contractions. And, some people would say they were Braxton Hicks, but I've been a midwifery student. I know how these things work. It wasn't Braxton Hicks. It was me fighting her birth. And I would sit on the edge of the bed and I would cry. And I would say, I'm not ready to have her. I'm not ready to have her. I'm not ready to have her. And I already had 2 children at that time, 2 sons. So when she was born, I was with midwives at the time, but they were CNMs, which is a certified nurse midwife. And the state that I lived in, they can't practice outside of the hospital. So you can't have a home birth. but also they couldn't practice after a certain week, like a certain amount of weeks in their birth center. It had to be in the hospital. So anyway, I was getting past that point for them, and I'd had a week of this, and I was sitting around 3 or 4 centimeters dilated. And the midwife, I came in and she said to me, Amanda, I can't legally touch you after tomorrow. Isn't that awful? That's a whole nother conversation. But she said, I can't legally touch you after tomorrow. So would you be open to being induced with Pitocin? And I'm not opposite to that. Like, I'm not judging anybody's births. I've had quite a few interesting births. Birth stories might be an interesting topic at some point too, and medicine of birth. But I wasn't inclined to that. I've never been inclined to even like take Tylenol. Like, it's just never really just even been my way. But I looked at her and I said, yes, I want it. And my then husband said, can you give us a minute? Because he was fine with that, I think, because he was just over it. Like, can we just, but he knew, like, that's not Amanda. And so she stepped out and he said to me, are you sure? And I said to him, I can't do this. Like, I just can't. I can't do it. And so they gave me Pitocin, which for me was its own experience. But I'm so glad that it was available to me because I didn't have it in me. And she was born a few hours later, and she was like, my biggest baby and squishy cheeks and pink and, all this stuff, But in retrospect, I think that I knew, like, how do I bring a girl into the world? How do I bring a daughter into the world? Like, remembering, what had happened and what my experiences had been. And it was after her that I also had postpartum depression, which also there were other factors because, like I said, the church was just something else and my physical well-being. But I think so much. I remember standing over her where I was changing her diaper one time, and this was very visual. I saw this huge wall of water beside of me that was going to crash down on me. So there was a lot of factors there, but I think that I knew at a certain level, and I was scared, to bring a daughter into the world. Okay, moving forward. Then when I began to remember what happened, very early on when I began to remember, as a matter of fact, I don't know if at this point I had said anything to my dad yet. I don't know if I'd gotten to the point with Violet that we spoke about where I said something to my dad. But I asked my husband at the time if he could bring the children into the bedroom because, this was very early on because I was in bed a lot with the vertigo and the vomiting there at the beginning, the first few weeks until I was with Katie and she was able to sort of give it a container. And they were so small, bless their hearts. Adults are so dramatic. I don't know how kids, how are any of us here and functioning normally? So they're standing beside my bed and they don't know what's happening. They don't know why I've not been feeling well, And I said to them, I am so sorry for all of the times that I have not been kind to you. I'm sorry for the times that I've hurt your feelings. I'm sorry for the times that I've said things that hurt you. I'm so sorry. And I love you so much. And I'm sorry for the times that I've hurt you. And they were little and they're staring at me like, okay, well, we love you, Mom, right? But the fact is I had been unkind. I had said harsh things. I hadn't always been soft and gentle, right? I mean, there are going to be women listening who are like, you have kids and you lose your mind and you're hiding in the bathroom and you don't even know what's happening to you. You know what I'm saying? And you're tired and hungry. But it completely revolutionized my mothering, remembering, and the medicine the plants gave to me. Suddenly the example of mothering that I had was not the only example of mothering there was. And rose and tulip poplar and violet, who's a grandmother medicine, and so many others were like, what if the feminine looked like this?
Mhm.
What if the feminine talked like this, just like with Matt? What if the masculine looked like this? What if this is the way the feminine could express? What if this is the way the masculine could express, right? Tulip poplar, we will be your parents. What if this was the way you could be a parent? So, am I a perfect parent? No, ma'am. That's what my mom would say. No, ma'am. But I I believe this about myself in the imperfection. I am a much better mother than I would have been if I hadn't remembered and if I hadn't met the plants. And a huge part of it is the the feminine energy of rose. Like there is the strength. I am strong and I'm soft and I'm tender and I love you and my heart is open to you. You know, um, like offering comfort. Like my mom, she just didn't like comfort.
Mhm.
And you know, when my older three were small, I didn't do a very good job of that either because she was, teaching you a certain way. My mom is she's still this way. Like, you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I'm like, I wanted to curse, but I'm trying not to. So I'm going to find something a little more moderate. To hell with the bootstraps. Like, no, like we can be tender. We can cry. It's okay if something hurts your feelings. You can come sit in my lap. And I know people are like, oh, we don't want to coddle. Look, everybody, it's okay. We'll find the balance. We'll work with it. We'll find the balance. And honestly, the way that rose and tulip poplar and American holly and so many plants make me feel is I'm not sure we can have too much love in this world.
Mhm.
Like we're so out of balance with it right now. It's almost like I'm not sure you can pour enough love into it. So, yes, yes, yes. The plants have changed my mothering, and I'm so grateful because, my older ones, they're still like, you could have done this better and you could have done that better, and they're not wrong. And then some things they're like, you could have done this better and you could have done that better. And I'm like, you're not right on that one. But I don't have to say it. It doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Um, because those things can exist and I can love them, and in my imperfection I can love myself. Do you know what I'm saying? Because my mom, and so many moms are like this, if I said, and I did actually, when I began to remember, right, and that didn't go well, what some of the things some of my older kids have said to me, what do? We put our defenses up and we get our thorns out. I'm gonna prick you like this. you know? Nah. You know what? My heart can be open to you. I'm gonna this if you're saying my breasts can still be soft. Like you can still rest your head here, right? I can still be a safe place for you, right? Like my thorns aren't for you, like you're not harming me. I don't know if I'm making sense, and I can hear all these voices in my head of people wanting to make qualifications and have nuances. And I would just recommend like using some rose, because it teaches the balance. It teaches the balance. Yeah, I'll stop there. You can tell, like, it was very transformational for me when it comes to mothering.
And that's why I wanted to ask, because I just had a sense that, how could this not affect your your mothering, or your even what you think is being a mother or sense, all of this is happening. And so I want to thank you
Yeah.
for sharing.
I want to say one thing about that. I had someone bring to my attention just in the last couple of years, and I never thought about it this way. Because in the church, they talk about mothering as being very feminine, like this is the, Mother Mary sort of, feminine. And I do think that's true of pregnancy, but mothering can take on a whole other energy once they get here. And I heard someone just in the last couple of years mention that mothering was actually quite a very masculine energy, a very masculine way of being, for lots of reasons, like you're protecting, you're taking care of, you're creating a container, for these little beings. You're giving direction, instruction, sort of these Mars masculine energies. This is very true. This is very true. Like becoming a mother, it it can really draw out masculine qualities. So for instance, think about when people will say about a wife that she mothers her husband, and they don't speak well of that. What do they mean? They mean she bosses him around. They mean she tells him what to do. You see what I mean? So there really is a masculine energy to mothering, but it's necessary. It's not bad. But this is a lovely thing about Rose. Like with Matt, how can we be masculine and have these masculine actions and have it well balanced with the feminine, so that we also have the nurturing, the gentleness, the tenderness. You see what I mean? And so I did want to note that, because when we talk about rose for love and as an aphrodisiac and for beauty, this might be more than people want, but it's part of the medicine. A lot of women that are my age or older or even younger, I think especially once you become a mother, but there are also other ways we experience it, like maybe in a career, other vocations and ways of working and being in the world. There's so much masculinity, and so we can lose the feminine, right? And I feel like in our culture we tend to think that as women get older, the fact that they might become more masculine or harder or hard nosed, it's just the way it is. And a lot of, I feel that feminine quality can get lost, if that makes sense, as we get older. And I just really love this about Rose, because I actually feel like I'm more feminine now with 6 kids and a lot of responsibility and a lot of things that require masculine energy now than I was when I was 16 and had like no responsibilities. And there might have been very little masculine energy. You see, so it's like this beautiful, just offers this beautiful medicine for, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble finding the words, but just this balance where your feminine and your feminine can bloom and open while being held by the masculine, all in one medicine.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. The division I got right away is when you talked about little Amanda sitting on the rose throne. It has structure, right? Some masculine energy, provides structure, support, but it's a rose, so it's very delicate. Well, I envision rose petals at least. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you mentioned the word balance, and I think that's really I think we're struggling with that these days in so many ways. And if we're just speaking about masculine and feminine energy, women, being able to balance out the masculine energy, where can that best be utilized, right? And especially if, yeah, there's so much to say on that. And then men similarly, that's something I really appreciate about my husband. I mean, he looks like this, like he's not, but he looks like he'd be like former military, that, he's got a lot of tough guy qualities, but he's so caring and tender. So several months ago we got a kitten, and it's so funny because, we got the kitten, but he kind of okayed it, because as a partner, as in life,
especially an animal,
you've got to be totally okay.
Yeah.
But she was just watching you. And so it was my kitten, but over time it's like, it's our kitten. And when it comes to feeding time, I'm like, Now she's a big kitten, so we can cut it down to, 2 or 3 feeding times, not like 5 feeding times a day. But he's like, but she looked hungry, or she really liked this. And just, it is enjoyable watching her eat, and just like totally enjoy it. And I love that. I was just one of the things that I love about him. And before I met him, I thought that I was going to marry a Latin guy, because to me, and having lived in Latin America, the Latin men had a better connection. Like they're more okay, it seems like, with, embracing the child, or, talking to the animal, and just kind of having those more tender qualities. And so, yeah, I think a lot of us are struggling in those ways, and having a model, can be so helpful. But I really do believe too, and have experienced, that the plants, sometimes when you don't have a model and you just don't know how to like bring it out of you,
Yes.
that they can gently help reform you.
Yes. It's such a beautiful thing about them. I love that you said that, at the end, because I think that's why Tulip Poplar said to me, "We can be your parents." Because not only at that time did I not have an example of parenting in the way that Tulip Poplar presented it from my own parents, but not even in my extended family, not even in the church I was a part of, just not even in my community. It's just not the way that parenting was done.
Mm-hmm.
And so for them to say, we could show you a different way, we could show you another way. And it's interesting because, I mentioned Matt, and there are other men that have come into my life since then. Not a lot, but enough, that are like in my circle, in my sphere. And I found myself, just observing them at times, at like a social function, like a dinner or something, and just watching, because it's just so curious to me still, I'm getting more used to it. Like it's gotten to the point now where it's like, if you're not this way, we're probably not going to be hanging out in social circles, so it's becoming more normal. But I'm still just amazed by it, because it was so long of not seeing that,
Mm-hmm.
of not seeing the balance of the masculine and the feminine in a person, you know. I'm still working on that with women. That doesn't seem to be quite as easy sometimes to see. The pendulum is swinging everywhere, as you've noticed. And that's what I think is so beautiful about Rose too, because when we see these things about ourselves that are out of balance, or when we see these things about others or about society that are out of balance, Rose is so lovely, like for self love. You're right, this is out of balance. You can love yourself. Or when we talk about seeing the world through rose colored glasses, there's so many levels of that medicine that we've touched on. We don't even realize the truth of what we're saying. So it can be rose colored glasses. We usually use that to say, you're not seeing the truth of something, right? And that was part of what Rose was wanting to do in the beginning, was take off the rose colored glasses, so you can see clearly. But how different the world would be if we were looking through rose colored glasses, lovingly, like to see the things that are out of balance, and to love what is outside of us and to love what is inside of us, because really we're mirroring these things, they're often one and the same. So those rose colored glasses in a loving way. And this is wanting to come up too. Rose is lovely for betrayal. I know that's like, oh, where did that come from? But a lot of times we think, this person betrayed me, or this institution betrayed me. But the self betrayal, right? That's really where it goes to. So a lot of times, if we mm, a lot of times when we start moving down through the layers of these examples we didn't see, and if we'd only known, we would have acted differently. And we go down. When we get down to the bottom of it, at the bottom of it is self-love, and at the bottom of it is betrayal of the self. And a lot of times we really need rose medicine for that mending of like the times we've betrayed ourselves. So, for instance, when we haven't been loving towards ourselves, or a lot of times in the way that maybe we act towards others, like that's not true to myself.
Mm.
Right? That's not who I am at my heart. This self betrayal, or when we allow others to treat us in certain ways, and betrayal of the self. You see what I mean? So I really want to bring that in to touch on too a little bit today, to just be sure that it's said that it's lovely for betrayal and not just, that's a really weird sentence. But it's lovely for betrayal and not necessarily only when we feel we've experienced that from someone else, but when we've experienced it mm, from ourselves to ourselves.
It's so interesting, the plant signatures, right? And we talk a lot about the doctrine of signatures at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism as part of nature wisdom. And there's so much to the rose. I mean, the rose is just like an amazing example. I mean, we can imagine how soft the petals are and how firm the stem is, and then how sharp and firm the thorns are. And so, as you were talking about betrayal, I mean, you can accept a bouquet of flowers, of roses from someone, and at the same time of receiving that beautiful, wonderful feeling, like, oh, I just got this gift, and oh my gosh, they're so beautiful. At the same time, you can be pricked all over your hands. And I think that is like the core of betrayal. You have some kind of a connection, you have some kind of good effervescent feeling, maybe not effervescent, but I think the more bilateral the tip, the stronger the tip, the more high, the more low when you get that prick. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting. For me, that was the visual that came up.
That's so curious to me because, you know, basically what I hear you saying is that, we can look at the roses and say, oh, they're so pretty, and I want them. I reach out to grab them or to receive them as a gift. And then we touch them and we have the thorns and the pricks on our hands and like, oh, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, right? This sort of betrayal. There was this
Sounds,
guy I heard. Is that what you meant?
it's unsuspecting.
Yes.
That's the key of betrayal, right? You did not expect it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So two things on that. One, there was actually this man that I heard say earlier this week. He said, people think if you have butterflies in your stomach, that's a great sign. Oh, when I was around them, I had butterflies in my stomach. And they said, maybe it's not a good sign. Maybe it's telling you something's wrong here. And I'm not saying that across the board, but it's interesting because of the image you presented.
Mm.
Right. And I think part of it is, and this is true of like stinging nettles and other plants, it's okay to like go in slowly.
Yes.
It's okay. And here, when we're talking about eyes, with eyes open,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to go in with eyes open and take care, right? And you may still gather in the roses, but you might place your hand a different way, right? So you're not being pricked similarly. But also that unsuspecting part, again, it's things that we don't see. It's things that we don't see. And we can talk about this in a way where maybe people would put it into the category of, if I love this person or I loved this person. And that's interesting in the past tense too. But and they betrayed me. And it's because of who they are or who I was or what that relationship was, right? So we kind of will put it into a certain category of people who betray us, certain types of relationships. And there is a truth to that at a certain level. But also, if you understand, it's just the nature of love. So we can have like betrayal at this huge level, right? Like infidelity. We can have what we would consider betrayal at that level, or maybe other types of betrayal. Like I can list off quite a few that I'm thinking of right now where I'm like, did that really happen in my life? Where someone that said they loved me did that? I mean, it's kind of bizarre the different shapes betrayal can take. But there's all these little ways that we can feel that because we didn't know that about them, or we didn't know that about ourselves, right? And so we thought we signed up for this, but we got that. And they thought they signed up for this, but they got that. And there's all these little nicks where we can have maybe um, a smaller version of a little bit of a betrayal, right? Like, why didn't they tell me that about themselves? Or why didn't I see that? Or they can think the same about us. I think there's something to it about to embrace another is to get pricked. Like, to embrace another is to feel the thorns. It's just part of it.
Or the potential, right? At least the
At least
potential.
the potential. Yes, at least the potential. Like I said, you might move a little slower and come in a different way. But yes, the potential of being wounded, the potential of being pricked. And I connect this also to you asking me about mothering. Depending on what circles you're moving in, it's rare when you're like of childbearing age, as they say, and you're just starting to have children, or you're thinking about having children or whatever, or you first find out that you're expecting a baby. It's rare that people sit you down and say, look, at some point, they're going to say these kinds of things to you. At some point, they're going to do these kinds of things. At some point, you're going to feel these ways. Nobody does that. Everybody's like, oh, it's a cute little baby. You're going to have a baby. I'm so happy. Let's go get some cute little outfits, right? Like, as a mother, I feel like my heart is just constantly bleeding. And I have good kids. But there's still the moments where a little something said or a lot said that they don't like something about you, or they don't like something you did, or you don't like something about them, or it's all these little unspoken things, or sometimes it is, or it's just incredible, especially as they get older and just have more like their own thoughts and their own opinions and ways of being, right? If you understand what I mean, that's unseen. You embrace the mother love, right? You embrace that experience of the human condition, to experience the love between a parent and a child. But it's also full of pricks. And again, like you said, it just depends on how wide are your eyes open. This is so important. Like, how much are you willing to see so that you can embrace the fullest that you can, and embrace with as little pricks as you can. It's interesting because that rose vine, oh goodness, that I mentioned, it had to go because I honestly could not figure out how any of us were touching it without that. And that's also sometimes the way it is, because rose is very much a medicine of boundaries. And sometimes there's really not a way to engage with particular situations, relationships, or people where there's anything but that. So we haven't really touched on that, but it is also a medicine of boundary, not just opening, but also saying no.
And then that you need to put on your gloves if you're going to be handling that particularly vigorous form. And there are people like that too. I think I do keep continually, I think there's a matriarchal aspect to, or maybe a rounded, I won't say necessarily well-rounded, but a fuller image of a woman in Rose. And that, some women are more soft. They have more of the petal-like qualities. Some of them might be more rigid, in the stem, and some are rather thorny, and some you just might get the beautiful waft, as you walked by. And, I think we're all come at a certain portion of that. And, these metaphors aren't necessarily, they're not meant to be exactly right or wrong. It's something to ponder, just like your journey I thought about this the other day. So Matt's first book, Matthew Wood's first book, was the seven herbs plants as healers, and also goes through a series of plants, of herbs, and I thought about this the other day because yours is similar but very different. Your book, and these were the plants that came to you that helped you along the way. And what's interesting is a person could go like, oh, could say, that is the recipe. Okay, I've had trauma. That's the recipe I need. But what's so amazing, and this is what I mean by metaphor, also is that they come in a very poetic way, in a very nuanced way. And it's not the rigid or linear path, which has for me been a really wonderful journey, because I tend to gravitate towards do these things in order, go this way. And it so really has opened me up in a number of ways as well.
Yeah, and I think I say that in the book. It might be in the introduction, but I say this isn't a protocol. I'm not offering this as a protocol. This is just my story. This is just my journey. So some of the ways we're talking about Rose, other people might not experience Rose this way, and it might not be the parts that are emphasized, right? Mm-hmm. But like you said, it is part of her essence, but what we draw out, can differ. I do want to say though that the matriarch aspect, it is very strong, however people might experience it. And what's really coming through for me very strongly today, and I'm not Catholic, this isn't my background, like I was raised in the church, the Christian church, but they don't emphasize Mary the way that the Catholic Church does. Just a very Mother Mary archetype. And some people also connect the Rose with even another woman connected to Jesus, but Mary Magdalene, which is another aspect, though, of the feminine. So we have like the matriarch, but then we've also got this, not really maiden. She's different from that. But these different ways that the feminine is expressing, but the rose is very much a part of it, of this matriarchal presentation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I'm feeling something in my heart. I don't know what's wanting to come out, but something's wanting to.
Well, we covered so much.
Yeah, I just have so much in my heart. I want to say, this is a rough thing to say, and I don't know why it wants to come out, but there's a lot that's coming up. I feel that my mom knew what was happening when I was small. This is a very Rose, multi-layered story. She knew what was happening when I was small, but she didn't want to believe that it was happening. She didn't want to see it because that's just too much, because she loves me. She loved my dad. Also, all the normal reasons she wouldn't want that to happen, even if you didn't have close ties. So she didn't see it. Right, so she closed her eyes to it because she couldn't do it. She didn't have what was needed and necessary for her to see it. But what she also began to do was to close your eyes is to close your heart. To close your heart is to close your eyes. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I just want to say that I feel that there is someone who's going to watch this or listen to this that's had a similar experience where your mom knew, or a matriarch, a womanly figure knew that you were being hurt in some way. It doesn't even have to be this way. It can be another way. And there's such a level of betrayal in that, because when we come into this world, especially if it's the mother, she's the one that we're expecting will protect us. She's the one we're depending on to take care of us. That protection, that boundary, to set the boundaries for us when we really maybe aren't able to. You know what I'm saying? So just the levels there, that there's somehow, it's like I can see petals like falling off a flower one by one by one by one by one, of these layers of mothering, matriarch, seen, not seen, open hearts, open eyes, closed eyes, boundaries, protection, betrayal, all these levels. And we talk in our society of this idea of the mother wound. And I think rose is a very like central plant for helping us mend what we're experiencing individually, but as a society, as the mother wound, where we're just incredibly out of balance with it. We're not, it's shifting and it's changing, but so few of us, instead of experiencing the medicine of rose as protection, being protected by the mother or the feminine, we've been pricked or wounded by it instead. This opposite effect. So then we repel it. So, like for me, when I was growing up, I never wore pink. I wasn't interested in roses, no floral prints. I was always wearing dark colors, a lot of black, not too much black because my Christian school wouldn't allow it. But my grandmother was like, Amanda Jane, don't you have anything with any color? Amanda Jane, put something on other than black. And, when I started working with rose during the miscarriages and spritzing it on my face and whatnot, then I did start to wear florals. And I actually lived in a house for a while where I painted some of the walls rose colors. And I buy myself, but for a while I think I was, and this happens, I think, like actively repelling it the way like the thorns would, because the feminine had hurt me. So I don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just a lot of healing that we're needing to do with that.
Yeah, I know exactly in my own way what you're saying. And so again, it's hard to model. It's hard to not do that yourself. And I think it's like, so my husband and I also do a podcast. It's John and Tara podcast. And we talk a lot about men and women's roles, their just their way of being, how it comes out in at least our marriage, and balancing that feminine and masculine. And we use a lot of martial arts analogies because that's both part of both of our backgrounds. Him initially, and I was his student, and have been for years. And there's a reason behind Karate Kid. Okay, there's beautiful metaphors, and when you meet force with force, you just get more force. But it doesn't mean that you don't use some kind of directed energy. And I think that's where women in particular, and just speaking of my own lineage and experience, is that going back to the thorn analogy, the thorn can just be even threatening. It's just like, ooh, okay, I'll be careful when I pick up that stem. It doesn't need to be always pricking and poking, but it's the mother that says, no, you don't touch my daughter like that. No, you don't, look at her like that. Or talking to someone else who maybe talks to that person, said, that was inappropriate. And so there are ways of utilizing that strength, right? The thorn has innate strength in its potential, but it doesn't have to be poking and pricking all the time. And I think that's where I hope, and that's even part of our podcast, is, how do we bring back that balance, right? And especially if you grow up, like I think you were alluding to, or if not saying, when you grow up in an environment where it's always poking, that's all that you know. And so to learn how to utilize that more, let's say, masculine energy, but balance it with the feminine.
I love that. I love how you presented it. It's so on point and necessary, where it's like I'm a rose and I'm not pricking you, but just notice that I have thorns. And it was interesting because my oldest daughter, a while back, we were having a conversation, and I don't know, she's so curious. She's 16, 17, and she was telling me the way that her friends, perceive me. And, some of it I was appreciative of. It was quite flattering. But the other thing she said that was curious to me is she said, but when you come into a room, I think you kind of scare people. And this was after she'd said things like, my friends think you're pretty, and I'm going to say things that are, I'm not, just know this was said by a 16 or 17-year-old. But she's like, my friends think that you could probably get a man and blah, 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 the way that they talk, but the idea being, for a mom, you don't look too bad and you're kind of fun. And, we like being around you, for the most part for a mom, right? But then she says, but I think when you come into a room, you kind of scare people and people get kind of quiet and they don't know what to say. And I have noticed that over the years. And I looked at her kind of funny, and she said to me, and this is interesting because my divorce situation was very hard for me, but she said, even Dad, like, you've been scared of him, but he's even like that with you now. And she kind of said a little more, and I think it was what you're saying. I'm a rose, but just notice. It's an energy. Like, I'm here, I'm happy. It's not fake, it's not false. It's just all this is a part of me. So don't mess with me and don't mess with my little ones. Like, it's interesting to say there's a mother bear energy. And I have experienced bear medicine with rose, which you wouldn't expect maybe for some people. But I have, but it's that mother bear energy, but only if necessary, only if needed. Like, I'm not always, poking and prodding. And I've told my daughter to just life, she's going to go here, do this, go here, do this. I'll say to her, that's fine, but I don't want any phone calls. And what I mean by that is I don't want someone calling me up saying, they said this, they did that. I don't want to hear it. I'm not, best behavior. I don't want any phone calls. And she's so funny now. She'll say, oh, nobody wants to call you. But it's like nothing bad has happened.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's a presentation. And I also want to know another phrase you said that I thought was such a good phrase is when you said directed action, like a direct focus. So it's not that there's nothing happening, something's happening, but what's the where's the focus? What is the action? What is the direction? And you, right before you said that, you mentioned the fragrance of the rose. And I think this is a really lovely image of how the feminine and the masculine find balance in the rose. So the rose, it doesn't prominently present the thorns, right? So that's not what we think of as maybe what we would think of as the masculine, like more of like a warrior, like a Mars sort of quality. It doesn't prominently present that.
It's not like a thistle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what it prominently presents is its beautiful blooms and its petals. What it prominently presents is the feminine. What it prominently presents is the color and the fragrance. That's what it prominently presents. And this is what I think is lovely too about the feminine, but even the mothering. What is it that draws us to the rose? It's not the thorns. Like, what draws us is the beauty of it, is the fragrance of it, is the feminine qualities of it, right? That's what draws us to it. So I think of this particularly with mothering. We could think of it maybe even in friendships, romantic relationships, whatever, but I'm thinking of it especially in mothering at the moment. Prominently displaying my thorns and pricking all the time is not what will draw them to me, right? But my like openness, and when I say beauty, I mean like beauty of like my heart, beauty of my life, my way of being, comfort, nurture. This is fragrant. She's fragrant. Like, this is what will draw them to me. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's lovely.
So it's a way of like, and I don't mean this negatively, I mean this positively, but the word can have odd connotations, but a way of wielding the feminine in a masculine way. I mean very direct and intentional with where I'm focusing. And I like to use the phrase aligned action. Like, this is a direct and aligned action. I'm being very intentional here, because now sometimes we do want to repel, right? So like you said, maybe I'll transform into a thistle, That can happen. But in this case, like, I want to draw in.
Mm-hmm. On a similar note, something that came up in my husband's podcast recently is why women have a hard time asking for things or being direct. And not that we solve the problem, but it was just an interesting path to explore. And as I itched my throat, I just scratched my throat at the same time. How about that? And what's interesting is, I think it can be perceived as, it's more feminine to not ask, not be direct, not be forward. But then you're left with people guessing, right? People guessing at what you're thinking, wanting. And then you can end up being the martyr or feeling like the martyr. Like, I never get what I want or I need. And something that I said to my husband that, wasn't particular for him, but just in general in my life, when I think of times, and there have been many, where I have not spoken up for what I want, need, think, and so forth, it's because I'm afraid of what I assume might come back at me. And that, of course, then in that moment, I'm assuming that I don't have the strength, the words, just I stumble on words or whatever is necessary to confront what is coming, what I assume will come back. And so I wonder, in a situation, extending some, I don't know your mother, I don't know your situation. I'm certainly not trying to sugarcoat the situation at all. But I wonder if there was a certain part of her that was like, I don't know how to handle what may come back at me if I say something. It's going to upset my husband. It's going to upset what you faced. You faced what she wasn't able to face.
Yeah.
You were the voice to bring it up and stand up for yourself. And it's just like, these types of things have been coming to me lately, with my own family stuff. And it's just like how trauma can go from generation to generation, and someone needs to confront it.
Mm-hmm.
Someone will need to speak up.
Yeah. No, I don't think you're sugarcoating it. I actually think, in keeping with our conversation and the medicine, you're presenting it with rose-colored glasses in a positive way, which is it's necessary for healing, for loving, to be able to look at my mom and put on rose-colored glasses to look through love and understand why she may or may not have done, what she did or didn't do. So yes, when you say what may come at you, and the interesting thing is that, here's something interesting. Oh, this is so fascinating. Just the levels of medicine here. So my mom, when I was small, she chose to not see it and chose not to hear, right? And this isn't just an assumption. Like, I'll just give an example. When I did tell her what I was remembering, she told me there was no way that had happened. I mean, immediately. I mean, she wasn't even like, oh my gosh, what are you talking about? Where did this come from? There was no shock. You want to know why there was no shock? Because she'd already been thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
What she told me was, oh no, that didn't happen to you. There's no way it happened to you. I mean, just right away. So I said to her, why not? Why do you think that? And she said, because I prayed that it wouldn't, so it didn't. And I said to her, that's not a normal prayer. Moms don't pray that prayer. I've never prayed that prayer, thankfully, for my daughters. I wasn't concerned that they were in that sort of danger with their dad. That's not normal. So she chose to look away. Because, like you said, I don't know, what was she afraid of? Who knows, right? A crumbling. So then you said someone's got to do it, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember I see it and I say, and what comes at me? What comes at me is my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Really, actually, not my dad. What came at me was my mom and her thorns. And you know what she said to me as an adult? When I was just devastated, like, with her response, which was so unsupportive and painful and belligerent. She said this in a very cutting way, so this wasn't said in a soft way, when she decided to give me one of the reasons that she had left me. She said, Amanda, I chose to protect myself. I chose self protection.
Mm-hmm.
If that's not like an imbalance of Rose, if that's not an imbalance of the thorns, if that's not an imbalance of Mother Bear, you know what I'm saying? You know, but when we hear that, I mean, I would think on some level we can understand it, you
The
know.
self-protection part.
Yeah, like we can understand that that would be a response we might have. So when you say what you say and say I don't want to sugarcoat it, no, I do think that there's rose-colored glasses to look through to try to understand and see and see people, if you understand, because you talked about family trauma, my mom as little her. So I'm little Amanda. What's going on with little her? You know, and she doesn't have the tools. She doesn't have, what she needs. So like you said, someone has to come along and do it. But I think that's a very interesting aspect of the medicine too to pay attention to, because the thorns are there on the rose and so many other plants like it for protection. And even self-protection. But there really does need to be a balance with when we're choosing that. It's how do I word this? Even though rose brings in self-love, which is so lacking, um, it's not presenting that the balance is that it's always self-protecting, right? That's not loving. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's trying to teach us a lot of nuances that are there.
Well, I think that goes back to earlier about what makes self-love via rose different than vanity or narcissism. Is
Yeah,
there is that, I don't know,
yeah,
I see like a soft area. It's not, we typically say the gray area, but it's like a soft boundary.
yeah,
It's more like the cell wall, right? That it
yeah.
decisively lets in and out.
Yeah. It's interesting too that you say that, because it takes me back to what we said at the beginning with the heart. And we were talking about like the fascia around the heart. So you have the heart itself, but then around it, you have what we call the pericardium, right? And in like traditional Chinese medicine and others, they talk about how it's a protector. It protects the heart. And so one of the things that the acupuncturist I was working with, that some of the distinctions she would make sometimes during my treatments was that the pericardium was part of what she was treating today, right? Because it was protecting and holding so much back, because if the heart was to take all that in, right, it wouldn't be able to hold it. But when we think about the pericardium, like you said, there's a softness to it. It's not a bone, right? There's a softness and a permeability. Although I use that word carefully, um, with the biology of it, but it's not a bone. Like there is a softness there, and that's the thing, is that when she said that, she was basically, well, she was saying a lot, but part of it was it's either you or me, right? It's all or nothing, and that's not really the case,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we can protect ourselves and do what we need to take care of ourselves, and also um, love another or protect another, you know.
On that note, I need to take a moment to feed a kitty. We're going deliciously longer than I expected. So tell them about your book, and I will be right back.
Okay. I'm like, okay, what do I want to say?
Give her
Okay.
the background about your book.
Yes, so you can find my book, Flowers for a Girl, on my website. You can purchase it through Lulu or Amazon. And it is going to have a revised edition soon. So you might want to get this one and just enjoy it as the original. but we move through with each chapter, it's a particular plant. So violet rose, blue cohosh, black cohosh, tulip poplar, early meadow rue. I think catnip is one, mugwort. But in each chapter, I share the the story, what's happening at that time, and it is very poetic. It's not written in prose form. If anything, it's more like prose poetry, and the emphasis um, isn't on the wounding so much as the healing and the medicine of the plants. And so there's a lot of stories, but also visioning, journeying, images, plants and animals that come into play, and stories that sort of make it possible to receive the medicine, like we said, without being re traumatized, and really just take it in whatever dosages your your own story resonates with it. I did it, Tara.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I think this is a topic you could literally go on for hours. And this is just talking about rose. This is just branching off of rose. And so many, I've had a very different but similar in a way experience, especially with the mother wound. And I have a feeling it's much more common than most people speak of, because it's we're raised to obviously not speak poorly of our parents, which I think generally is good, but then it's hard for healing.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for healing. And so maybe on a final note, I remember so we talked about, I think the challenge in extending the grace of seeing how our mothers, what might have initiated this behavior in them, what might have caused or why they are the way they are or were at that time. I think what I found difficult for myself is that if I accept her and I can see the reason behind her behavior, is that condoning what she did? And insert other person into your life. I think whether you know it or not, this often comes up. And so it makes forgiveness, it makes moving on more difficult, because you're afraid that that pain is going to happen. Something similar or same is going to happen again. And you mentioned right away, right early on in the beginning, that Rose helped to kind of hold the pieces or help. It wasn't even, I don't think you even said assemble. It was more like hold. And so would you share, because and then at the beginning also we talked about how it's such a scary process, because you're literally unfolding and recreating yourself, but you don't know what's next. Like the earthquake, like the volcano, that you're like, something is happening and all I know to do is run, And so the fear, I think, is, at least for me, it was inside constantly, but it blocked healing, it blocked forgiveness, whatever levels that were needed even to get to the next stage. What was your experience, or has been your experience with that process, even acknowledging who your mother was or how she became that way? And because it sounds like you've really processed through a lot. That's why I really want to ask, is because it's like sounds like you've gone the distance.
I'm tired.
I hear you.
You know what? I have processed a lot, and it's interesting. This next book, I Am the Tree. Wow, it's a very different book from Flowers for a Girl, and it was more difficult to write. And it's not about sexual trauma, and it was more difficult to write. And a couple of reasons it was more difficult to write is, in order to write it, I had to have processed and integrated a lot like almost my whole life. And also, um, a key element of that book is forgiveness. It's a huge part of tulip poplar medicine. Remember, in past conversations, I've said, the first time I said to Matt, "What do you know about it?" He's like, I don't really know much. I really haven't had a lot of experience with it, because he only had like maybe half a page or a page in one of his books. And this isn't in the book, but he added, well, it's not in his book, it's in my book. He added, and he is credited. He added, I think of it as the Jesus tree. It's for when we feel unforgivable. Right, but it's not just for when we feel unforgivable. It's also when we think something someone else has done is unforgivable. So anyway, yes, there's been a lot of processing, and I do want to say I have gone a ways, but I'm not finished. Some parts of it I'm finished with, but when it comes to my mom, there's still work to be done with my mom. Not so much my dad. Isn't that curious? And I say why. You learn why, and I am a tree. I am the tree. But what I would offer about that is this, and this is very much rose medicine. So we're talking about the heart and we're talking about the eyes. So Matt will talk about how with hawthorn, it's the heart and the tongue. But with the rose, it's the heart and the eyes. So what rose helps us to do is to see things clearly, to see them as they are, and then respond accordingly. But because it's rose, we're going to respond in a loving way. But love does sometimes require, self-love especially, protection. And to be honest, also of the other. So for instance, if you know that to approach someone because of their nature at the time, right? I mean, it's who they are at this time. They're going to poke and prick, and that's going to hurt you. Is that actually good for them? No, we don't need to give them more chances and more opportunities for that, because you know what that makes them do? It makes them hate themselves because they're not forgiving themselves. It's just more occasion for them to hate themselves. It's just more occasion for them to be mad at themselves. It's just more. It's just more. So it's good. But here's something a friend said to me. There's so much rose medicine in this. I talk about this in the book also. I am the tree. When I was experiencing the separation and the divorce from my former partner, my mom showed up again. Right? So she had left, she was gone, not just me, him, kids, all of us, but she showed up again. And she showed up to be with him. She showed up and she walked with him, even though it was rough. But she showed up, and some of you probably understand that, like, what's the word? Triangulation?
Okay, so she allied with him.
Mm-hmm. What do they say? Thick as thieves, right? So that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. The level of betrayal with that, to be honest, is probably the deepest betrayal I think I've ever felt. The level. Because I was in danger. It was very scary. I wasn't perfect. I'm not saying like, oh, I was pristine and he was awful. But I was definitely like being attacked. Like I lost my home. I almost lost my kids. I didn't have any income. All the things, like everything was gone. Right? Mm-hmm. I didn't have any of the things, like just for survival. And then not only am I trying to do this for myself, I'm trying to do this for 6 kids, right? To have them like be able to be with their mom and be taken care of, and not to the exclusion of their dad, just not lose their mom. It was very scary. So that would have been a lovely time for my mom to show up. Mm-hmm. She did show up, and she showed up, and throughout the process, and I'm sure she has her reasons. I'm sure she would give them. she visited him. They went on like little day trips with the kids to like amusement parks. The kids went there with him, not me, to swim in the pool, have cookouts. For the longest time, um, she sent uh, their birthday gifts to his house, even though they're here. Like we have shared custody, and during the week they're primarily here. Just very painful. You can probably hear it in my voice. It's just devastating, and I talk about this in my book. Well, when that first began, when she first showed up at the very beginning and it was seen what was going to happen, I was with a friend of mine and she said to me, Amanda, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And I was like, whoa. Because we always hear when someone tells you who they are.
Mhm.
She said, when someone shows you,
Mhm.
right? And so what had happened is I had reached out to my mom when that started, and I was torn about it. And I talk about this in the book at Tulip Poplar's council. Should I call my mom? And this same friend said to me, give her another chance to be a mother. Give her another chance. Right? And that's reasonable.
Mhm.
That's merciful, right? There's grace there. So I did, and it didn't go well. So that's a lot. That's a lot to say in response to your question. But the answer is when someone shows you who they are, believe them. So it is possible to forgive and still say no.
Mhm.
It's possible to forgive. This is where I'm saying it doesn't have to be you or me, us or them, either or, right? Like my mom with self-protection. I can have self-love and I can protect myself and I can forgive you. I can have self-love and I can protect myself and I can look at you through rose-colored glasses, loving. I see that you have your own pain. I see that you have your own wounds. I see that you are also little such and such. I see this and
Mhm.
and I think that's one of the reasons that people draw back from forgiving. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons. And I just so hope that Tulip Poplar's medicine for forgiveness can come through in the next book. But part of the reason I think sometimes we draw back from forgiving is because we think if I forgive them, then that means I have to like hang out with them. Or if I forgive them, I have to open myself up to them to hurt me again. And that's not what it means. It really just means I forgive you. I draw back out of this situation. I transcend it. And basically, I see you from like a divine view, a God's eye view. And I see the hows and the whys and the thises and the thatses. And I see that at the heart of it, you're human, I'm human, you hurt, I hurt. We see it, we see it. And then we coming down. And then we make decisions accordingly because we both know that there are people who have hurt us, and we know that we have also hurt people. But the nature of that person and the nature of us is not to just keep hurting. Like that you are safe and I am safe and they are safe for us to be around. But we also know that there are people that there's so much wounding that it's like they've gotten so many wounds that they've not been able to mend, that they've almost like turned themselves inside out. And now all those wounds that came in are like directed out, if that makes sense. They're like little puff fish. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I mean? So that was kind of a long answer, but I just felt like some of it needed to be said because, like you mentioned earlier, you don't want to sugarcoat it. It's not like it's easy. It requires an enormous amount of heart, to engage. So, does that answer your question a little?
I think that does definitely provide some perspective, and at the very least, food for thought, because it is a complex topic, right? And it
It
sounds
is.
like you do tackle it in your next book.
It
So
is. And like it's also like we said, there's not a protocol.
yeah,
I mean, every person and every situation has so many nuances, and it's so we need a wisdom. So you mentioned earlier like nature wisdom. Like there's a wisdom. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the plants is it's not like I walk around saying, this is what Rose told me to do. Like I'm a little robot, you know? It's like they open up places inside of us and help us remember a wisdom that we have. I do want to say one thing because I know we probably have to wind up because we have gone over a good bit. I want to say this though, because I don't think that this plant is going to have its own time between us. It's just not the nature of my experience with it. But in the book, there is a chapter on mugwort, and I haven't gone deeply with that plant past pretty much what's in the book. It's just not the relationship this plant and I have. But it's very connected to what we're talking about with mother wound, because the way it came to me in the book was for what Pam Montgomery, which some people may be familiar with her, she's really lovely with plant spirit medicine, but NVIDIA. So jealousy or envy, particularly from the mother. And so in the book, mugwort runs its hands all over my body really, really fast, plucking, 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 pluck, 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 pluck. And it was plucking out like countless daggers that had been thrown or put in through words or looks or, all the ways it can be directed. And a lot of it was NVIDIA, envy or jealousy. So, and this is another part of the rose medicine because, wow, this is so weird. It's weird to say. I just want to be so careful. Like, can I just say before I say this, this is part of the book, the next book too. When I'm talking about my mom this way, I want to say out loud, I do, this is part of the next book. Like, I bless her for the role that she plays in the medicine, if you understand what I mean. Like, I cannot talk about some of this without her being who she is. So I don't know how people think about our being here, how we got here, why we're here, why it plays out the way it plays out. People have lots of different belief systems. But some people will say that before we got here, some people will say that we wrote the story. We got together with other souls and they'll talk about soul contracts and things like that. And so, okay, so we're going to go to Earth and here's how this is going to play out because you're going to learn this and I'm going to learn that and we're going to bring this into the world. Okay, and I'm just presenting this. I really have no idea how it all works. But what I want to say is that I really do want to bless my mom, if that's the way it works, for the role that she chose to play. So the medicine of the plants can be talked about between you and I, or in these books, or in other places. Do you understand what I mean? Before I say the next part.
mm-hmm.
The next part is, it's like Snow White and the Wicked Witch. Mirror, mirror on the wall. Now we're back to Rose. Who's the fairest of them all? And she's really happy when she sees herself. And then suddenly Snow White gets older. And who shows up in the mirror? She does. Right? That's a thing. Like, it's a real thing. And I think, sadly, and this is really hard to say, I don't really like saying it, but it's part of the medicine. If your spouse was the person who did this with your child or someone else, it's very twisted how it becomes. Like, is that the desirable one? Am I not? Or this sort of thing. Or even if that's not the case, like growing up, like, okay, I think I'm pretty magical. And my mom used to say to me, you've got too much imagination. And she just hated all these things about me. It's just nonsense. She didn't admire them. She didn't like them. But maybe, like, I don't know, she might call me up and fuss about it, but, like, maybe at her heart, she'd like to be that way too. Maybe she would also like to have that way of being in the world too. Maybe she'd also like to have that kind of appeal too. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So this is a Rose way of, like, trying to understand. But it can also make for the reason you might need mugwort, which is invidia and jealousy and envy, to pull out the daggers, that can be put in. I feel like that was really heavy what I just said. So,
Well, I think there's so much truth. I think truth can feel heavy at times. It's strong, right? There's a strength in truth, and there's so many things that hit home for me. Very true. My mother actually said she was jealous of my relationship when I first got together with my. I don't know if we were married yet, but that was definitely about at the time of us separating, and you know, like your friend said, when they say and show you who they are, believe them. And I think that's at, on a level, especially with your mother, that is so unbelievable at first, and many times for me, it was many times, and it's taken even for me. I'm I wouldn't talk about this alone. Like, I wouldn't come out on a podcast. I haven't written about this, but I have felt personally that these stories need to come out, because how many other women are going through this. And just at that moment, Jen is saying, "Thank you for everything. This is so incredibly helpful." And I think there are a lot of women who have these wounds, and then it affects us in how we're able to be in our other relationships, whether a spouse, children, friends, and so I think both of us have talked about on video and not, or broadcasting and not wanting to be disrespectful. We both grew up in Christian backgrounds, and I think it's very ingrained, to honor their mother and father. And I'm one way. I had someone say this to me recently, that the way that I might have met my husband. One way that you honor your mother and father is by being you. You
yeah.
are the product.
Mhm.
And, similarly, I'd say my intentions, if I bring up an instance, is not to speak poorly of them, because I'm very happy with who I am. And the experiences in hindsight, it wasn't fun at the time, but the experiences that it took to get to this point. But at the same time, if we remain quiet, then others can't. Like, I have decades, at least 1.5 decades, where I feel like I was stopped in time because of the trauma. And I am starting to speak out more, because I don't want someone else who's 20, who's just going through something similar, to spend even 2 years, in that stuck state.
I think that it's lovely what you say, um, because it's noting the importance of truth telling. Because to tell the truth is loving, and you have your background in the church as well as I do, and so you'll be familiar with the Bible passage that says what? Speak the truth in love. So I can say these things here about my mom or other people. I mean, there's other stuff I can say, right? But and you can probably hear in my voice sometimes how hard it is to talk about some parts of it still, and I can feel it in my chest and my gut, as I'm talking about it, because it still hurts. But I can speak the truth in love. It really matters where it's coming from. Like, am I saying these things to, like you said, to poke, to prick,
Mhm.
right? Or are we just doing some truth telling? Are we just removing rose-colored glasses, to use it another way, right?
Mhm.
Because that's honestly where the healing begins. That's actually part of the problem, right? That's part of the problem a lot of times in these situations, like in the situation with my mom. Bless her soul today. Honestly, I feel bad. I'm just like sending her prayers out because she's coming up so much in this episode. She she can. This is complicated, but we'll make it simple. She continues to wear rose-colored glasses in the negative sense. right? Delusional, like you're not seeing things clearly. Because why? Because her heart will shatter. She can't take it. Why? Because if you see things clearly and the truth is known, what is going to be seen? It's what's going to be seen is not just that, oh, all those people are bad, right? But you're you're not like A plus 100% either, right? This is why Rose is so important because it's also self love, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right now, I'm being so specific. I've not ever really been this specific about her. She doesn't love herself, so she can't love me, right? But truth telling is necessary. We have to take off the rose colored glasses in a negative sense to see what really is the truth of the matter. How, like with my own kids, when I said, come to my bedside, how have I really acted? How have I really been? Because then if I see it, then I can see it. And then I can say, I'm sorry and I love you, and I can make a shift and I can make a change. And then I can put on rose colored glasses in a positive sense and say to myself, I love you and it's okay, Amanda. Like you did do or say these things or not do and say these things. You did prick. You did also do these things. And I love you. You see what I mean? It's just such a huge part. Um, the truth telling is a huge part of medicine.
Okay, I just had this flash. I don't recall the story Sleeping Beauty very much. Oh my gosh, she's the one that pricked her own finger with, wasn't it the rose? Was it the needle or rose thorn?
Well, in some of the stories it's a rose, and in some of them it's the spindle wheel. But the point
Yeah.
is she puts her finger. That's the point.
And does she wake up at that point?
I think that when she pricks it, and this is a Disney version, someone might be like, oh, there's a darker German version, let me tell you. But it's the witch, Maleficent, or the fairy, she's put a curse on the spinning wheel. And when she pricks it, when she's of age, then she falls into the sleep, the deep sleep. And then it's the prince that awakens it with true love's kiss. That's the Disney version. But there is the pricking. And it is of the time when she's coming of age. I don't know. There may be more truth to that story, but there is the prick and the curse. The curse that comes on it, and she falls into a deep sleep, and so does everybody else in the kingdom. And I just feel like so many people are walking around in a deep sleep. It's like you are not awake to what really is your life. And your person. The world would be so much better if we could just wake up and love ourselves. that sounds easy, doesn't it? Let's all just wake up and love ourselves.
Well, and honestly, I think we're all led to where we need to be in life. And as I do like becoming an herbalist series, I've interviewed a number of herbalists, whether they're in clinical practice or they have multiple ways of applying their skills and their passion. What shows up over and over again is following that inner guide, following those inklings. And so for me, I was into, before building Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism with Matt, and my husband's very involved as well, is I was looking for something. I was into a quote alternative health and wellness, I think more holistic health and wellness, but I was struggling with a way to apply it. And there are things that come along in our life, and then just your interests, your passions, and so forth. And where am I getting with that? There's so before all this, I just thought herbs were herbs. You take it like you take a pharmaceutical, and it helps with this. But it's like, before I probably would have kind of been like, oh, pshaw, like herbs can't help you on the emotional level. They can't help you on the spiritual level. But they absolutely do. And so even when there have been there are times where therapy, counseling, I mean, this is a therapy. We're talking through our experiences. This is medicine. For me, honestly, reading the Bible has been very much medicine for me as well, that I haven't gotten elsewhere. And there are also places where the plants have touched me, and not, physically, emotionally, and energetically, that other things couldn't reach. And so, like you said, there's so many people, you feel that there's so many people just walking in that cloud. I think a lot of us don't know how. There's kind of needs, and the plants can do it in a gentle way where it doesn't have to be cracking you upside the head. And I hope through our, we'll have more conversations about the other herbs that you mentioned in your book, because I mean, this is just one herb. Goodness, 2 hours and on just one plant. But really, they do have such a profound effect, layered, helping with the layers. And they don't have to be, they aren't necessarily like shock therapy, right?
No.
They're very holistic.
Yes. Yeah, because I feel like sometimes when we're talking about this, it can be scary because people can think this is a scary topic and I don't want to experience this. And if I work with the plants, I'll experience this. No, like, it's been very beautiful. It's why I wrote Flowers for a Girl. I remember I was keeping notes. That's what was happening is when I started to go see Katie, I wanted to write down what was happening. I wanted to remember. And it was also a way for me to process it, right? But I wanted to write it down because it kept being so beautiful. I had never had the experience that I was having with the plants as I did when I started to work through that. It was the portal, for me to experience plant spirit medicine the way that I do and the way that I have. And it was so beautiful that I wanted to write it down. I wanted to remember. I didn't want to forget. And so what happened was, at one point, towards the end of that process and that time with her, that part of the process, I looked down at my notebook and realized, oh my goodness, I have a book. And I thought at the time, and I still think it's a beautiful book because it's beautiful medicine. Because isn't it beautiful how Cleavers came and did that? Isn't it beautiful how early Meadow Rue came and did that? Isn't it beautiful how Rose came and did that? Something that was so like just ugly, like I remember part of that incest sermon series. He would read the same chapter over again every Sunday before he started the next sermon on the next verse in that chapter. And there was a refrain in it. It is unclean. That was the refrain about the different relationships that were being listed. It is unclean. It is unclean. And my soul was hearing that. My soul was hearing that. Like I was sort of taking it on myself, or maybe I was already thinking that about myself. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So this situation where there's this pronouncement, it is unclean, it is unclean, it is unclean, or abomination, this, that, and the other. Suddenly, Cleaver's like, hi, I'm sparkly and have green leaves, and I can jump into your heart space for you and help you clean that out. You know what I'm saying? And like Matt shows up, and he's like a bear, and Easter Lily comes, and there's this baptism, and I have these, glass slippers on. You see what I'm saying? But this was the way that my body and my heart and the plants came together and said, let's talk to her this way. If we talk to her this way, she'll understand what we're saying. She'll understand what happened, but she won't be re-traumatized. And apparently, we'll get a book into the world where we can share our medicine on this. You know what I mean? And it's interesting too when you say people walking around not awake, and some of us don't have the tools. This is true. But sometimes I even started to think like, maybe not everybody's supposed to. Like I am starting to wonder about like, okay, guys, let's tell this story. Okay, well, you do this, this, that, and that. Okay, well, I'll do this, this, that, and that. Okay. And so when you say one of the ways we can honor our parents is to be ourselves, right? I've really felt that through this process, not just with my parents, but in general, Like, what's the best way that I could embody healing from this? It's to be myself, to be fully myself. But I look at it, as weird as it sounds, I've started to look at it in this way of, if I if I do my part with this, no pressure anybody, because I don't know what your part is. But if I do my part with this, like for me, if I write the book, if I write the books, if I articulate the medicine, if I tell the story as true as I know to tell it, and as loving as I know to tell it, then like at the end, like at a soul level, are we all going to sit down and be like, we did it? We put that medicine into the world. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for all these different roles. You see, and not that my role is the greatest, because in someone else's story, I might be playing a role that I don't like very much if they were to write theirs.
Yeah.
This is very imaginable, but it's like, there's just something to that I don't know, I just feel in my heart that at some point I'm going to sit down on a soul level and we're all just going to nod at each other. Feel like we did it.
That's amazing. That's a perfect point to, I think, end here. I don't think it could be any better. We just will nod at each other. Well done, Amanda.
Well done, Sarah. We did it.
I almost don't want to say any closing thoughts, but I have to. Rachel is saying, I agree as well. We cannot thank you both enough for this. Such divine timing to be present for this present. And roses and hearts, and Heather says thank you as well. And I'm only pleased if it really helps and serves, because it's definitely only meant to do that for sure. So, okay, back to podcasting realm and podcasting world. Absolutely check out Amanda's book, Flowers for a Girl, Plant Medicine and Sexual Trauma. Like I've mentioned before, and I'll say again, even if you don't think you've had trauma, maybe you've had mild trauma, it's not just for sexual trauma, I would say emphatically. And you can find out more about her at alchemillas.com, ALCHEMILLAS.com. She has a lovely podcast as well. Poetry. Sign up for a newsletter for beautifully written newsletters, very poetic and inspiring in its own way. And we will be doing more of these. We have many more herbs to cover, and I've enjoyed these I've enjoyed talking with you from the beginning. I so value that, we could be girlfriends and talking about this and just going through our own stuff. But I really feel that this is meant, and you've helped me to feel comfortable talking about it, because I really do want this to serve. I don't want people to go through, close to 2 decades of like being in my own, like Sleeping Beauty, got pricked and poof. And so thank you very much. I appreciate having you to converse with, and together it feels like we are bringing this out in with the best intentions I think there could be.
Yeah. Thank you, Tara. I really appreciate the space, because like I told you before, I don't talk very much anymore. I've been very focused on the writing. So thank you for creating a container where I do feel comfortable talking about it, because I know that you're in a good heart space, because I wouldn't want to be somewhere where I felt like, let's just like bash our moms or bash our parents, or but like you said, for healing and well-being. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. We will meet again next month. I'm looking forward to it already. And take care, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.